The polished marble floor of the obsidian room was usually stained with expensive wine, but tonight everyone expected it to be stained with blood. 120 pounds of pure muscle, a cane corso named Nero, had just snapped his leash. His jaws were inches from a man's jugular. The screams had died out, replaced by a terrifying, suffocating silence. Even Demetrius Walker, the man who owned the city and the monster on the loose, reached for his gun a second too late. Then a hand reached out. Not a bodyguard, not a hitman. It was the girl who had just refilled the water glasses. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She did something that made the most dangerous man in New York freeze in his tracks. And that mistake was about to cost her everything. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. Inside the obsidian room, however, the weather was irrelevant. The restaurant was a fortress of velvet, gold leaf, and hushed conversations that cost more than most people's mortgages. Cassandra O'Neill adjusted the collar of her stiff white uniform. Her feet throbbed. She had been on a double shift since 6 in the morning, and the blister on her left heel felt like it was weeping into her sock. But she needed this. The rent for the studio apartment in the crumbling block of East Pike was 3 days late, and her landlord, a man with grease under his fingernails and zero patience, had already threatened to change the locks. "Table 4 needs a refill. Don't look them in the eye," the floor manager, Henri, hissed as he breezed past her, smelling of stale espresso and anxiety. Cassandra nodded, grabbing the crystal pitcher. "Don't look them in the eye," was the standard operating procedure here. The clientele of the obsidian room weren't tech billionaires or trust fund kids. They were men who moved in silence, men who arrived in armored SUVs and paid in cash that smelled like it had been buried underground. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was a physical change, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado touches down. The heavy oak double door swung open, and the silence that followed was absolute. Demetrius Walker walked in. If you lived in the city, you knew the name. If you worked in the shadows, you feared the face. He was tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of a bespoke Italian suit. His hair was dark, slicked back severely, revealing a face that was handsome in a way a jagged cliff is handsome, striking but dangerous to get close to. But it wasn't Demetrius who made the staff press themselves against the walls. It was what walked beside him. A massive cane corso, slate grey and built like a tank, trotted at his heel. The dog wore a thick leather collar studded with platinum, but no leash. He didn't need one. He moved with a predatory grace, his yellow eyes scanning the room with an intelligence that was almost human and entirely unsettled. "Mr. Walker," Henri stuttered, bowing so low it looked painful. "Your usual table is ready. We didn't expect the companion." Demetrius didn't even look at him. He kept walking, his stride eating up the distance to the corner booth. "Nero goes where I go." His voice was a low rumble, like gravel shifting in a quarry. He sat, and the dog immediately sat beside him, placing its massive head on its paws, facing the room, watching. Cassandra felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had grown up around dogs. Her father had run a kennel for failed police dogs before the alcohol took him, and she knew what she was looking at. Nero wasn't a pet. He was a weapon. His ears were cropped close, his muscles bunched and tense. He was a loaded gun with a heartbeat. "Cassandra!" Henri snapped, pulling her out of her trance. "Water. Table 4, now. And for God's sake, do not spill a drop." She swallowed hard, gripped the pitcher, and walked toward the corner booth. The air around Demetrius Walker smelled of expensive scotch and gun oil. As she approached, 2 bodyguards stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. Demetrius raised a hand. "Let her through." She stepped up to the table, Her hands were shaking, just a little. She poured the water into the crystal glass, the ice clinking softly. Nero, the dog, lifted his head. He sniffed the air near her hip. Cassandra froze. She knew the scent of fear triggered aggression in dogs like this. She forced her breathing to slow. She didn't pull away. She didn't look at the dog. She simply finished pouring and stepped back. For a second, the dog's yellow eyes locked onto hers. A low, barely audible growl rumbled in his chest. Demetrius looked up, his eyes narrowing. He looked from the dog to the waitress. "He usually doesn't let strangers this close without taking a finger," he said, his voice devoid of humor. "I'm not afraid of dogs, sir," Cassandra lied. She was terrified of this dog. "You should be," Demetrius replied, turning his attention back to the menu. "Get out of here." Cassandra retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know it yet, but the night was about to go from tense to catastrophic. An hour later, the restaurant was at capacity. The tension around Demetrius Walker's table had only thickened. He was joined by two other men, Russians, judging by the accent and the brutalist tattoos peeking out from their cuffs. The conversation was low, aggressive, and punctuated by the clinking of vodka glasses. Cassandra was clearing a table nearby, trying to make herself invisible. She could hear the Russians raising their voices. "You think you can squeeze us out of the port, Walker?" One of the Russians spat, slamming his hand on the table. The Volkov family does not forget insults. Demetrius remained calm, leaning back in his chair, swirling his drink. "It wasn't an insult, Dmitri. It was an eviction notice. Get your shipments out of my docks, or I burn them." The Russian, Dmitri, stood up so abruptly, his chair fell backward with a loud crash. The entire restaurant went silent. Nero was on his feet instantly. The dog didn't bark. He just lowered his head, his hackles rising like a razorback ridge along his spine. A low, vibrating growl filled the corner of the room. "Control your mongrel," Dmitri sneered, reaching into his jacket. It happened in a blur. Dmitri pulled a gun. Demetrius's bodyguards moved, but Nero was faster than all of them. With a roar that sounded like a lion, the Cane Corso launched himself across the table. He hit Dmitri in the chest, 120 pounds of force, knocking the man backward into a waiter carrying a tray of steak knives. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air. Patrons scrambled under tables. Dmitri's gun skittered across the floor. Nero pinned the Russian to the ground, his jaws snapping inches from the man's throat. The Russian was screaming, flailing, which only drove the dog into a deeper frenzy. This was prey drive. This was the kill switch. "Nero, aus!" Demetrius shouted, lunging forward. The dog didn't listen. He was in the red zone. He clamped his jaws onto Dmitri's forearm, shaking his head violently. Bone crunched. Blood sprayed across the white tablecloths. Demetrius grabbed the dog's collar, trying to pull him off, but it was like trying to move a parked car. The other Russian leveled his gun at the dog's head. "Don't shoot the dog!" Demetrius roared, pointing his own weapon at the Russian. It was a Mexican standoff in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant. If the Russian shot the dog, Demetrius would kill the Russian. If the dog didn't stop, he would kill Dmitri. And in the middle of the blood and the screaming, Cassandra moved. She didn't think. It was instinct, buried deep in her muscle memory from years of watching her father rehab the dogs that the police couldn't handle. She dropped her tray and sprinted toward the chaos. "Get back!" Demetrius shouted at her, his eyes wild. "He'll kill you!" Cassandra ignored him. She slid on her knees, disregarding the broken glass, skidding right up to the thrashing animal. She didn't grab the collar. That was a rookie mistake. It only increased the dog's drive. She made a sharp, high-pitched sound. Tst! It was a sound used to break fixation. Nero's ears flicked back. She didn't hesitate. She jammed her fingers into a specific pressure point behind the dog's jaw, right where the muscle met the bone, and simultaneously hooked her other arm under his front legs, lifting them off the ground. "Leave it!" she commanded. Not a scream. A command, low, guttural, authoritative. She twisted the collar upward, cutting off the dog's air for a split second, a technique called a choke-off, used only in life-or-death K9 situations. Nero gasped, his jaws popping open. Dmitri scrambled back, clutching his mangled arm, wailing in Russian. The dog spun around, eyes wild, looking for the new threat. He lunged at Cassandra. The room gasped, but Cassandra didn't flinch. She stood her ground, puffing her chest out, staring the beast directly in the eyes. She held out a flat palm, inches from his wet, bloody snout. "Platz!" she barked, the German command for down. Nero froze. His chest heaved. Blood dripped from his muzzle. He looked at the girl, this tiny thing in a waitress uniform, and confusion clouded his aggression. He blinked. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive dog lowered his hindquarters, then his front paws. He lay down, his eyes never leaving hers. Cassandra let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since she was born. She kept her hand extended, trembling slightly now. Total silence descended on the room. Demetrius Walker stood there, his gun still in his hand, staring at her. He looked at his dog, the animal that had killed men for less, now submitting to a waitress. Demetrius lowered his gun. He stepped over the moaning Russian and walked up to Cassandra. He towered over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Who are you?" he whispered. Cassandra looked up, her eyes wide. I'm just the waitress." Demetrius looked at the blood on her apron. Then he looked at the door where sirens were beginning to wail. "Not anymore," he said. The police arrived 3 minutes later, but the cleanup had already happened. The Russians were gone, dragged out the back by Demetrius's men. The manager, Henry, was paid off with a stack of bills thick enough to choke a horse. Cassandra was in the kitchen, washing the blood off her hands in the stainless steel sink. The water turned pink and swirled down the drain. She was shaking now. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her cold and nauseous. She turned off the tap and turned around to leave, to run, to get back to her studio apartment and lock the door. Demetrius Walker was blocking the exit. He was leaning against the doorframe, smoking a cigarette. The smoke curled around his face. Nero was sitting beside him, calm as a statue, the blood wiped from his muzzle. "You handled him," Demetrius said. It wasn't a question. "I grew up around dogs," Cassandra said, her voice tight. "My dad, he trained them." "That wasn't training, that was dominance," Demetrius said, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward her. The kitchen felt suddenly very small. "Nero has killed 3 professional handlers. He doesn't listen to commands unless they come from me, and even then, it's a negotiation." He stopped 2 feet from her. "Why did he listen to you?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Please, I just want to go home." Demetrius studied her face. He looked at her worn-out shoes, the fraying hem of her skirt, the desperation in her eyes. He saw potential, but more than that, he saw a necessity. "You can't go home," he said flatly. "Excuse me. The man my dog just mauled, that was Dmitry Volkov, the son of the head of the Russian mob in Chicago. He saw your face. He saw you save my dog. In his eyes, you're not a waitress. You're my associate." Cassandra felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't save your dog. I saved the man. Doesn't matter." Demetrius flicked ash onto the floor. "By tomorrow morning, your face will be on a hit list. If you walk out that back door, you'll be dead before you reach the subway." "This is insane," Cassandra stammered. She tried to push past him. Demetrius's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was iron, but not painful, just firm. I don't offer charity, Cassandra. I offer survival. You have a talent. I have a problem. My dog is becoming unstable. He's a liability, but I can't put him down. He saved my life twice. He pulled her slightly closer. You're going to come with me. You're going to live at the estate. You're going to fix him. And if I refuse? She challenged, finding a spark of anger beneath the fear. Demetrius gestured to the back door. Be my guest, but check the alleyway first. Volkov's men are already circling the block. Cassandra looked at the door, then back at Demetrius. She looked at Nero, who let out a soft whine, and nudged Demetrius's hand. How much? She asked. Demetrius smirked. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it was terrifyingly charming. 10,000 a week, plus room and board, and protection. 10,000. That was more than she made in 6 months. It could pay off her father's debts. It could get her out of the slums. I need to pack, she said, defeated. My men will pack for you. Everything you have is trash anyway, Demetrius said coldly. Let's go. He turned and walked out. Nero followed. But at the doorway, the giant dog paused. He looked back at Cassandra, waited for her to step forward, and only then did he trot into the night. She was no longer a waitress. She had just walked into the lion's den, and the door had locked behind her. The drive to the Walker estate took 40 minutes of silence. The SUV was armored, the windows tinted so dark that the world outside was just a smear of grey motion. Cassandra sat in the back, squeezed between a leather seat that cost more than her education and a dog that could crush bone with a single bite. Nero had his head on her lap. It was absurd. An hour ago, he was a mythical monster. Now, he was snoring softly, the vibrations humming against her thigh. Don't get used to it, Demetrius said from the front passenger seat. He didn't turn around. He was watching the side mirrors, his hand resting near the waistband of his trousers where his gun was tucked. He plays nice until the switch flips, then you're just meat. He's not a machine, Mr. Walker, Cassandra said, her voice steadier than she felt. Dogs don't have switches, they have triggers. We'll see. The SUV slowed as they approached a massive iron gate flanked by stone gargoyles. This was Black Ridge, an estate built on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, isolated by miles of dense pine forest. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress. Floodlights swept the perimeter. Men with assault rifles patrolled the walls. As they pulled into the circular driveway, the rain began to pour again. Demetrius opened the door, and the mood shifted instantly. Adrian, Demetrius barked. A man stepped out of the shadows of the grand porch. He was lean, with a face like a hatchet, and eyes that looked like they had seen too many shallow graves. This was Adrian Mercer, Demetrius's head of security. He looked at Demetrius, then at the dog, and finally his gaze landed on Cassandra with a sneer of absolute disgust. Boss? Adrian nodded. We heard about the mess at the restaurant. Volkov is already making calls. We're on lockdown. He gestured to Cassandra. Who is the stray? The new handler, Demetrius said, walking past him. Set her up in the guest quarters near the east wing. She stays close to Nero. Adrian blocked Cassandra's path as she tried to follow. He leaned in, smelling of peppermint and gunpowder. I don't know what game you're playing, sweetheart, he whispered, his voice like dry leaves. But that dog is a liability. I've been telling Demetrius to put a bullet in its brain for 6 months. If you screw up, I won't wait for his permission. Cassandra didn't back down. She was used to bullies. If you touch the dog, you answer to the boss. If you touch me, the dog answers to you. Take your pick. Adrian's eyes narrowed. For a second, Violence hung heavy in the air. Then, Nero let out a low, warning woof. Adrian stepped back, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face. Cassandra walked past him, her head high, but her hands were trembling. Her room was luxurious but cold. Silk sheets, mahogany furniture, and bars on the windows. It was a prison cell wrapped in velvet. But she didn't have time to sleep. She went straight to the kennel attached to the east wing. It was a state-of-the-art facility, climate-controlled, with tiled floors. Nero was pacing. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, entering the run. She needed to understand why he had snapped. Demetrius said the dog was unstable, but the animal she saw at the restaurant was confused, not crazy. She ran her hands over his massive frame. He flinched when she touched his left flank. "Easy," she murmured. She parted the thick grey fur. There, hidden beneath the coat, was a small, angry red welt. It looked like a sting or an injection site. She checked behind his ear. Another one. Her blood ran cold. These weren't accidental injuries. Someone was hurting him. Someone was systematically tormenting the dog to keep him in a state of high anxiety and aggression. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. The door to the kennel creaked open. Cassandra spun around. Demetrius was standing there. He had shed his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and scars. He held 2 glasses of whiskey. "You're not sleeping," he said. "I'm working," Cassandra replied, standing up to block Nero from his view. She didn't trust him yet. "Drink," he offered, extending a glass. "It's a peace offering. I was rough earlier." Cassandra hesitated, then took the glass. She took a sip. It burned, but it settled her nerves. "Mr. Walker, your dog isn't crazy." "Demetrius," he corrected. "And yes, he is. Last week he bit the maid for dropping a spoon. The week before, he tried to tear the tires off the limo. He has puncture wounds," Cassandra said flatly, "on his flank and behind his ear. Someone is jabbing him, probably with something sharp, maybe even mild doses of stimulants. He's not aggressive, Demetrius. He's being tortured. He's in pain, and he doesn't know where it's coming from, so he attacks everything." Demetrius's expression changed. The tired, arrogant mask fell away, replaced by the sharp, lethal look of the crime boss. He set his glass down on a grooming table. "Show me." She showed him the marks. Demetrius ran a thumb over the welt on Nero's flank. The dog whined but didn't bite. Demetrius's jaw tightened until a muscle feather in his cheek jumped. "Only 3 people have access to this kennel," Demetrius said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Me, the cleaner, Martha, and—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "Adrian," Cassandra finished for him. Demetrius stood up, his eyes dark. "Adrian has been with me since we were kids. He took a bullet for me in Chicago. He hates the dog, yes, because he thinks Nero makes me vulnerable. But he wouldn't betray me." "He wouldn't betray you," Cassandra argued. "But he would sabotage the dog to prove a point, to force you to get rid of him." Demetrius looked at her. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not as a waitress or a tool, but as a woman who had just walked into his war room and pointed out the cracks in the walls. "You better be right," Demetrius said, stepping close to her. The heat coming off him was intense. "Because if you accuse my right hand without proof, you start a civil war inside this house, and you will be the first or casualty. I'll prove it," she said. "You have 24 hours, Demetrius replied. "Tomorrow night, the Volkovs are sending an envoy to negotiate a truce. If Nero isn't under control by then, Adrian puts him down. Personally." The next morning, the Walker estate was a hive of activity. Black SUVs patrolled the grounds, and men with earpieces checked every window and door. The peace talk with the Volkoffs was high stakes. One wrong move, and the streets of Seattle would turn into a war zone. Cassandra spent the day in the training yard with Nero. It was a grueling process. She had to deprogram the aggression. She used a clicker and high-value treats, raw steak cut into cubes, working on basic focus drills. Click, treat, click, treat. Nero was brilliant. He was starving for direction. He wasn't a monster. He was a working dog without a job. From the balcony of the third floor, Demetrius watched. He held a cup of black coffee, his eyes tracking Cassandra's movements. She moved with a fluidity that mesmerized him. She was small compared to the beast, but she commanded space. She didn't use force. She used leverage and tone. "She's good," a voice said behind him. Demetrius didn't turn. It was Adrian. "She's temporary," Demetrius said. "Is the perimeter secure?" "Tight as a drum. We checked the guests for wires. No weapons allowed inside. Just the Don and 2 advisors." Adrian stepped up to the railing, looking down at the girl and the dog. "You know it's a mistake, keeping the beast alive for the meeting. One bark, and the Volkoffs will think it's an ambush." "Nero stays," Demetrius said, his tone final. "He's part of the family." Adrian gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "Family doesn't try to kill you, Dom." "Depends on the family," Demetrius muttered. By 7 p.m. the sun had set, and the estate was bathed in amber floodlights. The Volkoffs arrived in a convoy of Mercedes sedans. Cassandra was ordered to keep Nero in the library, adjacent to the main hall where the meeting was taking place. The heavy mahogany doors were slightly ajar, so Demetrius could call for the dog if things went south, but the instruction was clear. "Keep him quiet." Cassandra sat on the rug, stroking Nero's head. The dog was tense. He could smell the intruders. "Stay," she whispered. "Platz." Nero lay down, but his ears were swiveling like radar dishes. In the main hall, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Demetrius sat at the head of a long table. Opposite him was Ivan Volkov, the patriarch, a man who looked like a walking corpse, skin papery and grey. Beside him sat 2 younger men, their eyes darting around the room. "My son Dmitri will never use his arm properly again," Ivan rasped. "You owe us blood, Mr. Walker." "Dmitri pulled a gun in a public place," Demetrius replied smoothly. "My dog was simply enforcing house rules. No weapons." "We want the ports," Ivan demanded. "Give us the shipping lanes in Tacoma, and we forget the insult." "No." The silence stretched. In the library, Cassandra saw something that made her heart stop. A tiny red dot appeared on the floor near Nero's paws, a laser pointer. Nero's head snapped down. His prey drive kicked in instantly. The dot moved, darting erratically across the rug, then up the wall, towards the slightly open door to the meeting room. Cassandra scrambled up. She knew this trick. It was used to drive dogs insane, to wind them up until they snapped. She looked around frantically. Where was it coming from? She saw a flash of movement in the ventilation grate near the ceiling. Someone was up there. The red dot flicked onto Nero's nose, then darted out the door into the hallway. Nero let out a roar that shook the walls. He scrambled for traction on the hardwood floor, claws scrabbling. "Nero, no!" Cassandra dove for him. She missed his collar by an inch. The dog burst through the library doors, crashing into the main hall. The meeting erupted. The Volkov bodyguards jumped up. Ivan shouted something in Russian. Nero wasn't attacking a person yet. He was chasing the red dot that was dancing frantically over Ivan Volkov's chest. To the bodyguards, it looked like the dog was charging the Don. "Don't shoot!" Demetrius screamed, standing up. But the Volkovs didn't wait. One of the bodyguards reached into his jacket. They did have weapons. He pulled a suppressed pistol. Thwip! The bullet missed Nero and shattered a vase. Nero, triggered by the aggression and the noise, shifted targets. He forgot the laser. He saw the gun. He launched himself at the gunman. It was chaos. Cassandra ran into the room, screaming commands. "Nero, a US, down!" But the noise was too loud. The gunman kicked Nero, sending the dog skidding. The man raised his gun to put a bullet in the dog's head. Demetrius moved. He didn't go for his own gun. He stepped in front of the dog. "Stop!" Demetrius roared. The room froze. Demetrius Walker was shielding his dog with his own body. The Russian gunman hesitated. In that split second of silence, a high-pitched whistle blew. It didn't come from the Russians. It came from the shadows of the upper mezzanine. Nero's head whipped up. His eyes rolled back. He turned, not toward the Russians, but toward Demetrius. The whistle was a command he had been secretly conditioned to obey. Kill the handler. Nero lunged at Demetrius's throat. "No!" Cassandra didn't think. She threw her body between the man and the beast. She took the hit. Nero's heavy paws slammed into her chest, knocking her to the floor. His jaws snapped shut, not on her throat, but on the thick leather servitude collar she had grabbed from the table earlier to put on him. He missed her flesh by millimeters. She wrapped her legs around the dog's torso and her arms around his neck, applying the chokehold she had used in the restaurant. "Look at me!" she screamed into the dog's face. Nero was thrashing, drool flying, eyes wild with induced madness. "It's me! It's Cass!" she cried out. Demetrius was there instantly, his gun drawn, but he couldn't shoot. Cassandra and the dog were a tangle of limbs on the floor. "Cassandra, move!" Demetrius yelled. "No, don't shoot him!" She squeezed tighter, whispering into the dog's ear. "Platz, it's okay. Platz!" Slowly, the red haze in the dog's eyes cleared. The frantic energy drained away. Nero collapsed on top of her, whining, licking the tears that were streaming down her face. The room was silent again. Cassandra gasped for air, pushing the massive head aside. She looked up. Demetrius was standing over her, his face pale. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking up at the mezzanine. "Close the doors," Demetrius said. His voice was no longer human. It was the voice of death itself. "Nobody leaves." He walked over to Cassandra and offered her a hand. She took it, and he pulled her up, keeping her close to his side. "Did you hear the whistle?" Cassandra whispered, clutching her bruised ribs. "I heard it," Demetrius said. He turned to the Russians. "Get out. The deal is off. If I see you in my city again, I wipe your bloodline." Ivan Volkov looked at the mad dog, then at the madder man. He nodded once, and the Russians retreated, fleeing the house. Demetrius turned to the room, empty now except for his guards. "Adrian," Demetrius called out. There was no answer. "Where is Adrian?" Demetrius asked the nearest guard. He went up to the mezzanine to secure the perimeter, boss." Demetrius looked at Cassandra. "You were right." He checked his gun magazine. "Stay here with Nero," he ordered Cassandra. "No," she said, grabbing Nero's collar. The dog stood by her leg, alert and ready. "We finish this." Demetrius looked at the two of them, the battered waitress and the pitbull of a dog. He nodded. "Let's go hunting." The Walker estate went dark. It wasn't a flicker. It was a hard cut. The amber floodlights outside, the chandeliers in the hall, the security monitors, everything died instantly. A second later, the emergency backup kicked in, bathing the marble corridors in a suffocating, rhythmic pulse of red light. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a heartbeat. It felt like being inside a dying body. "He cut the mains," Demetrius whispered, pressing his back against the wall of the main corridor. He controls the electronic locks. We're trapped in the East Wing." Cassandra knelt beside Nero. The dog was vibrating with tension, his ears swiveled forward. In the red light, his eyes looked like glowing embers. She ran a hand down his spine, feeling the muscles bunching. "He's in the server room," Cassandra said softly. "It's the only place he can override the perimeter gates to let the Russians back in." Demetrius looked at her, impressed despite the adrenaline. "You learn fast." "I listen," she replied. "He said the perimeter was tight as a drum. He was bragging. He wanted you to feel safe before he opened the doors." They moved. It was a tactical formation, Demetrius taking point with his weapon raised, Cassandra right behind him, hand on Nero's collar. They were no longer boss and employee. They were a pack. The house, usually silent, was filled with the sounds of betrayal. The intercom system crackled to life, static hissing through the speakers. "You never listened, Dom." Adrian's voice floated through the hallway, distorted and metallic. "You brought a street rat and a feral beast into our house. You made us weak." Demetrius didn't respond. He moved silently over the Persian rugs, signaling Cassandra to stop at a corner. "The Volkovs promised me the city," Adrian taunted. "All I have to do is hand them your head. And the girl? Maybe I'll keep her. She has spirit." Nero let out a low growl, deeper than thunder. Cassandra squeezed his neck. "Quiet," she mouthed. They reached the heavy steel door of the server room at the end of the west gallery. It was locked. Electronic keypad. "Dead. I can't breach this without explosives," Demetrius muttered, holstering his gun to check the panel. "He's dug in." Suddenly, a shot rang out. Not from the server room, but from the balcony above them. A bullet struck the floor inches from Cassandra's foot, sending stone splinters flying. "Ambush!" Demetrius roared, tackling Cassandra into the alcove of a statue. 3 men, Adrian's loyalists, rappelled down from the skylights, wearing tactical gear and night vision goggles. They hit the floor and opened fire. Bullets chewed up the walls. Plaster exploded. Demetrius returned fire, dropping 1 man with a shot to the knee, but they were pinned down. "We can't stay here," Demetrius yelled over the gunfire. "They'll flank us." Cassandra looked at Nero. The dog was cowering slightly, not from fear, but from the deafening noise. He was confused. The chaos was triggering his PTSD again. He was looking at Cassandra, waiting for the madness to take over. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Nero, focus!" she screamed. She pointed at the gunman on the left, who was advancing behind a marble pillar. "Packen!" she commanded. "Bite." It wasn't the blind rage of the restaurant. It was a targeted missile strike. Nero launched himself from the alcove, a grey blur moving under the gunfire. He didn't bark. He just hit the man with the force of a freight train. The gunman screamed as Nero dragged him down, shaking him violently. "Cover him!" Cassandra yelled. Demetrius leaned out and fired 2 precise shots. The second gunman dropped. Nero released the first man on Cassandra's whistle, a sharp, piercing sound she made with her fingers. He spun around, looking for the next target. The third gunman, terrified by the beast, turned to run back toward the stairs. Demetrius stood up and shot him in the shoulder. The man fell. Silence returned to the gallery, broken only by the groans of the wounded men. "Good boy," Cassandra whispered, her voice shaking. "Good boy." Nero trotted back to her, panting, blood on his muzzle, not his own. He sat down and leaned against her leg. Demetrius walked over to the wounded man who had tried to run. He grabbed him by the vest and hauled him up. "Where is Adrian?" Demetrius demanded. "He's not in the server room," the man wheezed, clutching his shoulder. "He's waiting for you. In the kennel." Cassandra's eyes widened. "The kennel? Why?" The man smirked, blood staining his teeth. because he knows you'll come for the dog's things, and he rigged it to burn." Cassandra gasped. "My father's journals, my training logs, everything I brought is in there." "Forget the journals," Demetrius said, dropping the man. "He's trying to draw us out." "No," Cassandra realized, her face pale. "He's not trying to burn my things. The gas line for the heating system runs directly under the kennel floor. If he ignites it, he blows the entire east wing," Demetrius finished, "with us in it." They had 5 minutes, maybe less. "Run," Demetrius commanded. They sprinted back the way they came, adrenaline overriding the fatigue. Nero ran beside them, matching their pace effortlessly. They burst into the kennel block. The smell of gas was overpowering. It was a thick, rotten egg stench that burned the throat. At the far end of the run, standing by the rear exit, was Adrian. He held a flare gun in one hand and a heavy remote in the other. He looked manic, sweat pouring down his face. "End of the line, Dom!" Adrian shouted. "Step back!" Demetrius froze, holding his hand out to stop Cassandra. "Adrian, put it down. You blow this, you die too." "I have an exit!" Adrian kicked the door open behind him. The rain lashed in, dark and cold. "But you burn." He raised the flare gun. The distance was too great. Demetrius couldn't shoot him before he pulled the trigger. If a bullet sparked against the metal cages, the gas would ignite. They were checkmated. "Let the girl go," Demetrius said, his voice calm, negotiating for the last time. "This is between us." "She fixed the dog," Adrian spat, pointing the flare gun at Cassandra. "She ruined everything. The Volkovs wanted the dog dead so you would be weak. She made him a weapon again." Nero sensed the threat. He let out a snarl that vibrated in the gas-heavy air. "Nero, wait," Cassandra whispered. She saw Adrian's finger tightening on the trigger. She needed a distraction. She needed 1 second. She reached into her pocket. She didn't have a weapon. She had the clicker, the small metal strip used for training. Click. Click. The sound was sharp, cutting through the heavy air. It was a conditioned sound. To Nero it meant, "Look at me." But to Adrian, in his high-strung state, it sounded like the hammer of a gun dropping. Adrian flinched, his eyes darting to Cassandra's hand. That was the mistake. "Fass!" Demetrius roared, the command for attack, a command he hadn't used in years. But Nero didn't move on Demetrius's command. He hesitated. He looked at Cassandra. "Go!" she screamed. Nero launched. Adrian fired the flare gun. The flare hissed through the air, a streak of blinding white phosphorus. It missed Cassandra by inches, slamming into the wall behind her. It sizzled, hot and dangerous, but it didn't hit the gas pocket near the floor. Nero hit Adrian before he could reload. The dog slammed him backward out the open door into the muddy rain of the courtyard. Demetrius and Cassandra bolted forward. Diving out of the gas-filled room, just as the heat from the flare finally ignited a pocket of fumes near the ceiling. Boom! The kennel roof blew outward. A fireball rolled over their heads, singeing their hair as they tumbled onto the wet grass outside. The explosion wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow. The shockwave punched the air from their lungs, and for a terrifying second, the world was nothing but a ringing silence and the searing heat of the fireball rolling over their heads. Cassandra hit the wet grass hard, the breath driven out of her. Mud splashed into her eyes and mouth, cold and gritty, contrasting violently with the heat radiating from the collapsing kennel structure behind them. She scrambled to her hands and knees, gasping, her vision blurring in the torrential downpour. "Demetrius!" she choked out. A strong hand gripped her arm, hauling her up. Demetrius was there, his face smeared with soot and rain, his eyes scanning the chaotic darkness. But it wasn't Demetrius who commanded the center of the courtyard. It was Nero. In the hellish, flickering orange glow of the burning building, the massive cane corso was a creature of nightmare. He had driven Adrian into the mud, his weight pinning the traitor to the earth. Nero's jaws were clamped tight over Adrian's right hand, the hand that had held the weapon, crushing the bones with a sickening, wet crunch. Adrian screamed, a high, thin sound that cut through the thunder. He thrashed in the muck, his legs kicking uselessly against the dog's iron-like stance. "Call him off!" Adrian shrieked, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Oh God, call him off, Dom! He's tearing it off!" Demetrius stood motionless for a moment, his chest heaving. He wiped the rain from his eyes, staring down at the man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral, the man who had taken a bullet for him in Chicago. The betrayal didn't just sting, it festered. He walked over slowly, his boots sinking into the softened earth. The firelight danced in his cold, dark eyes, making them look like abysses. "Nero," Demetrius said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, barely rising above the hiss of the rain. "Os." The training held. Despite the bloodlust, despite the chaos, the dog obeyed. Nero released Adrian's mangled arm instantly and stepped back. He didn't run. He sat at Demetrius's heel, his chest heaving, steam rising from his soaked grey coat. He was shivering, not from cold, but from the adrenaline dump, yet his yellow eyes remained locked on the man in the mud. Adrian cradled his ruined hand against his chest, curling into a fetal position, sobbing. The tough security chief, the man who bragged about killing with his bare hands, was reduced to a weeping wreck. "I did it for us, Dom," Adrian wheezed, spitting blood and rainwater. "You have to understand. The Volkovs, they were going to crush us. They have the politicians, the ports. I made a deal to save the family. I was going to cut you in once they took over." "You are the family, Adrian," Demetrius said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was the flat, dead tone of a judge passing a final sentence. "Or you were." "Please," Adrian begged, using his good arm to crawl backward in the mud, his eyes darting frantically between Demetrius's gun and the silent, watching dog. "I can fix it. I know their operations. I know where Ivan sleeps. I can give you Ivan Volkov on a silver platter. Just let me." Demetrius didn't let him finish. He turned his head slightly, looking at Cassandra. She was standing a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, her hair plastered to her skull, and she was trembling violently. But her eyes were clear. She looked at the traitor in the mud, and she didn't see a friend or a victim. She saw the laser pointer dancing on the floor. She saw the whistle that had turned Nero into a weapon against his own master. She saw the torture marks hidden under the dog's fur. "He hurt the dog," Cassandra said. Her voice was simple, stripped of all doubt. "He tortured him to get to you. If you let him live, he'll just find another way to break what you love." Demetrius nodded slowly. He looked back at Adrian, who had stopped crawling and was now staring up with the realization that his time had run out. "The handler has spoken," Demetrius said. He didn't hesitate. He didn't offer a final speech or a moment of redemption. Demetrius drew his weapon and fired 2 shots. They were swallowed instantly by a crack of thunder, the flash of the muzzle merging with the lightning above. Adrian slumped back into the mud, his eyes staring blankly at the storm clouds, the rain already beginning to wash away his sins. Demetrius holstered his weapon with a mechanical click. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the relentless rain. Then, the tension in his shoulders finally snapped. He turned to Cassandra. She was shaking harder now, the adrenaline crash hitting her with the force of a physical blow. She looked like a war survivor, bruised, muddied, and exhausted. Demetrius closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't care about the burning wing of his estate behind them, or the corpse cooling in the mud. He reached up and unbuckled his tactical vest, shrugging off the heavy Kevlar, then peeled off his ruined dress shirt. He draped the shirt over her shoulders, pulling the collar tight around her neck. The warmth of his body heat clung to the fabric, enveloping her. "You saved my life," Demetrius said, his voice rough. "I saved the dog," she corrected, her teeth chattering as she looked up into his face. "You just happened to be standing next to him." Demetrius laughed. It was a genuine, ragged sound that seemed to surprise even him. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt and blood from her cheekbone. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he had just dispensed. "Nero chose you," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "In the restaurant, in the library, and just now. He hesitated when I gave the command, but he moved when you screamed. He waited for you." "He trusts me," Cassandra whispered, leaning instinctively into his warm hand. "So do I," Demetrius replied. The admission hung in the air between them, heavier than the rain. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, fairy tale kiss. It was desperate and fierce, tasting of rain, metallic adrenaline, and survival. It was a claiming. Demetrius's hand tangled in her wet hair, pulling her closer, anchoring her to him, while the world burned around them. Cassandra grabbed the lapels of his vest, pulling herself against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of his heartbeat. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the invisible waitress or the girl drowning in debt. She felt powerful. She felt like the queen of the chessboard, standing on the wreckage of the game she had just won. A sharp, happy bark broke the moment. They pulled apart, breathless, foreheads resting against each other. They looked down. Nero was sitting there, his tail thumping rhythmically against the wet grass, looking up at them with an expression that could almost be described as a grin. "I think he approves," Demetrius smiled, the corner of his mouth quirking up. "He just wants dinner," Cassandra laughed, though the tears mixing with the rain on her face were real. "He worked hard for it." Demetrius straightened up, wrapping an arm protectively around her waist. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to pierce the night. The fire department, and likely the police captains on his payroll, coming to clean up the mess. "We have to go," Demetrius said, his gaze shifting to the horizon. "The Volkovs will know Adrian failed by morning. When they realize I'm still alive, they'll panic. War is coming." "I'm ready," Cassandra said, and she meant it. The fear was gone, burned away in the fire. "You're not a handler anymore, Cassandra," Demetrius said, guiding her toward the surviving armored SUV parked near the unblemished West Wing. "You're a walker, and walkers don't run. We reload." They walked toward the car, a united front against the storm, and trotting between them, head held high, was the massive grey dog. He wasn't a monster, and he wasn't a pet. He was a guardian, watching over the only pack that mattered. The waitress who had walked into the obsidian room to pour water was gone forever. In her place was the only woman who could tame the beast, and the man who owned him. The city belonged to them now. Cassandra O'Neill didn't just survive the night, she conquered it. 6 months later, the streets of Seattle were quiet. The Volkovs had been pushed back to Chicago, their operations dismantled by a unified Walker family. If you visit the Obsidian Room today, you won't see Cassandra pouring water. You'll see her sitting at the corner booth, dressed in silk and diamonds, reviewing the ledger. And sitting beside her, always watchful, is Nero. The Pitbull who went berserk, only to find the one person who understood his language. They say every king needs a queen, but in Demetrius Walker's world, the queen carries the leash, and she isn't afraid to let the monster off it. Wow, what a ride. From a spilled glass of water to a mafia war, Cassandra proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the guy with the gun. It's the woman who controls the dog. I want to know what you would have done in Cassandra's shoes. Would you have run out the back door when Demetrius offered you the job? Or would you have stayed to tame the beast? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of danger, betrayal, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have plenty more twisted tales coming your way. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.